Welcome back to the Reading Room. I am Josh Bearheart Hawk, author of The Journal, Legends and Tales, Creepy and Fun Stories to Tell Around the Campfire, and GPS Signal Lost, Attempting to Reestablish Connection. And if you're here, you're probably already familiar with the series. If you're not, you can go back and start from chapter 1. But we're reading my debut novel, The Journal, chapter by chapter. We're getting through it. We're on chapter 9 for this video. Last video, we found out in chapter 8, we learned some new stuff, and follow Josh as he found the old house, and it looks like it's abandoned. There's a barn out back, so we're going to be catching up some more on that in future chapters. But chapter 9 is actually going to be a Heath chapter. If you want to read along with the story itself, you can actually pick up any of one of my books, whether it's The Journal or Legends and Tales or GPS Signal Lost, which I've got over here. You can pick those up over on Amazon, or you can get a signed copy over on my website. And then you can read along with the stories as we go through, because the journal's not the only one we're covering. We're also going to be reading Legends and Tales. There's 23 short horror stories that we're going to be going through, which is going to be a lot of fun. And then we're going to be reading GPS Signal Lost as well as upcoming books. I've got a couple other books in the works too that are going to be coming out. So, every book that I publish is going to be coming out in this form, because I think it's a lot of fun to kind of sit back and relax and read the stories. My goal with this series is kind of make it a relaxed environment where you can have a cup of coffee or tea or something like that, sit back and just kind of relax and listen to the story. We got the fireplace and all that fun stuff going on, so you can that's kind of the tone what we're trying to set, which is why I don't get directly into the chapters. I'm not making it some kind of formal audiobook thing where we're just kind of reading the chapters all formal and everything. No, it's supposed to be kind of fun, and that's it makes it interesting because I can share with you some of the reasoning behind the things that I wrote. I can share some behind the scenes kind of knowledge and that kind of stuff. So that's where I try to make it a lot of fun. By the way, you can ask if you have questions throughout the chapters as I'm reading them. You can ask those questions in the comments section of the videos, and I'll be happy to answer them. Eventually, I'll probably do a Q&A video about the journal specifically, and maybe I can answer the questions in the Q&A video as well. So let me get a sip of coffee here, and then we'll go ahead and jump into chapter 9. Where are we at? Chapter 9. Okay, so this is getting back to what's going on with Heath, and we're gonna find out a little bit more about that mysterious barn. The chapter itself, chapter 9, is called The Barn, so you're not going back there. I won't allow it. James rarely raised his voice, but in this case, he couldn't help himself. He was standing behind the bar as Heath sipped on a beer and contemplated risking his life over a piece of clothing. You saw that dress. It had to be the one Persephone was last seen in. My guess is he has her in that barn, hopefully alive, and we need to do something. Even Heath couldn't believe the words that were coming out of his mouth. Only a few days ago, he wanted to walk away from the case and pretend it had never entered their lives. Yeah, I saw the dress, and I also saw that creep looking at you as you stared at it. He knows you saw it, and he would have removed it by now. He would have removed her by now if she was there at all. Call the police and tell them about it. Let them go out there and deal with it. He knew that when Heath got an idea in his head about something like this, there was no stopping him. But at the same time, he had to try. The police aren't going to do anything. You already tried that route and they shut you down. All I'm going to do is sneak around a bit, see what I see, and get out of there. If there's anything worth reporting, I'll report it to the authorities when I get back. Plus, you'll know where I am if I go missing, you can come after me. Heath could tell by the look on James' face that he had him with this line. Sipping down the last of his beer from the bottle, Heath set it down on the counter and started to get up. Just be careful, Heath. If something were to happen to you, I don't know what I would do. His eyes revealed the deeper truth to the words as he spoke them. Walking out of the bar and into the hot afternoon sun, Heath knew he would need to wait a few hours before going back to the farm. This would be his best chance to get some rest, but first he needed to check on something. Climbing behind the wheel of his light blue sedan, he headed for the county clerk's office, where he hoped to find a map of the property and help him plan out the evening. Entering the office, he was greeted by a gray-haired, short woman who reminded him of a teacher he had in grade school. She was more than happy to assist him, especially when he told her he was with the archaeology department at The Ohio State University and working on a project that would bring the whole world's attention to the small town. She excitedly hurried off to look for any maps or photos that could help, leaving him to wait in her small office. After a few minutes, she returned with an armful of documents and laid them all out on the desk. Looking over them, he was impressed to see how much was there. Aerial photos, hand-drawn maps, and building plans, even a few photos of the house being built. This would be more than enough to help him plan his route in and out. Thanking the friendly clerk for her help, he made his way out with the documents and headed back to his office to look over everything and catch a quick nap on the couch. If everything worked out, this might be the night that he solved the case. The feeling of being shaken woke Heath from his nap. Samantha was standing over him with the plate in one hand and the other hand on his shoulder. "I figured you could use a bite to eat before you head out." She smiled as she walked over to his desk, setting the plate down and making her way to the door. "What time is it?" Heath asked. "It's just after 11, she replied as she left the room. Heath sat up and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. 4 hours of sleep was better than no sleep, but he couldn't help but think of how much more comfortable the nap would have been in his own bed. Getting up and walking over to his desk, he saw Samantha had made him a turkey sandwich and chips. He sometimes forgot how wonderful she was to him. As he ate, he went over the maps and photos he had gotten from the clerk one more time. The newest map was over 5 years old, though he suspected not much had changed in the farm over that time. The plan was to park his car in a pull-off that he had seen a couple of miles from the farm and hike through the woods to the edge of the property. He had a small flashlight if he needed it, but the moon was nearly full and would provide a decent amount of light to help him find the barn. He needed to be out of there before daybreak, and Samantha would call James if he hadn't returned by 8 a.m. After he finished eating, Heath changed into an all-black outfit that he only used for jobs like this, where some stealth was needed. Feeling like some kind of international spy, he climbed into his car and made his way through the dark streets toward his target. The parking area he had planned on using was occupied by another vehicle when he arrived. As he pulled up next to it, he could see the windows were fogged up, and a smile cracked his face as he thought about the terror his presence must be bringing to the occupants. Shutting off his engine and climbing out of his car, he thought about how much different his younger years would have been if he had a car to take girls out to places like this. He had his fair share of romantic encounters in his teens, but those times were usually interrupted by his foster parents until he was old enough to be on his own. By that time, he had found himself in a life of adventure and didn't have time for love. The closest thing he had to a romantic relationship was Samantha, though they weren't really involved much beyond a professional level. Quietly, he closed the door and crept into the woods toward the direction of the farm. When he was far enough away from the lot, he flicked on his light to get a better view of the surroundings. He had never been great at navigating in the woods, especially at night, but he had a good sense of direction and generally knew where he needed to go. The trek took a little longer than he expected, but after a little over an hour of walking through the forest, he walked out into a clearing on the southwest corner of the farm. In the moonlight, he could make out the field with the barn standing tall in the distance. Behind the barn, he could see the house a little bit further away, with lights on in the windows. Staying low, Heath made his way slowly across the field. The sound of the crickets and the sight of the stars overhead would have made this the perfect place to sit down and relax if he was there for any other reason. As he crept closer to the barn, he found himself hoping that the only thing inside would be tools and farm equipment. Finding Persephone alive would be ideal, but he was terrified of the alternative. As he walked to the barn, the walk to the barn felt much longer than the walk through the woods had been. if only because he imagined Alex sitting in the farmhouse with a rifle pointing in his direction and ready to fire at any moment. This fear was most likely irrational, but his mind had a tendency to sprint toward the wildest outcome it could, and creeping as slowly as he was through the field gave it plenty of time to go through the worst possibilities. He stopped to rest up against the side of the barn before proceeding to the door that sat a few feet away. Worried that the door would be locked, he hesitated for a brief second before grabbing the handle and slowly turning it. To his surprise, the handle turned and the door started to creak open. Carefully, he opened the door wide enough to peek inside, being greeted by a dimly lit interior. He couldn't make out anything that was inside, but there was a light coming from somewhere around the corner. Opening the door wide enough to fit through, he slid inside. It didn't take long for his eyes to adjust to the new light, but there wasn't much to be seen at first. Sitting just inside the door, Heath could make out that he was in a stall and that he was alone. Remaining quiet, he listened out for any other noises before proceeding slowly through the stall, deeper into the barn. As he reached the stall door, he thought he heard something metal moving around on the other side of the barn, but he wasn't sure exactly where the noise was coming from. Peeking around the corner of the stall door gave him a better view of the space he was in. A small lantern hung from a hook near the large main door, providing enough light to make out the hay-covered floor and other stalls. There was also a wagon sitting up on blocks near one of the stalls, and he made a note that it would make a good spot to hide if he was in a pinch. Creeping out into the walkway, he made his way over to the stall on the opposite side of the building to begin his search. As he approached the entry, he heard movement coming from inside and couldn't help but move a little quicker with excitement. Peeking around the corner, he could just make out what appeared to be a cage inside the stall, and he had to use his flashlight to get a better look. The bright light illuminated the space more than he anticipated, revealing a young girl in the cage before him. She looked emaciated, and her eyes seemed to be pleading for mercy. Before he could even fully take in the scene or ask her about her name, a sound from a neighboring stall caught his attention. Moving over, his stomach turned when he found another cage and another girl in the same condition as the first. "Please, I'll do anything you want. Just let me out." Her voice was barely audible. "I'm here to help. How many of you are there?" Keith wasn't sure what to do, but he knew he had to figure something out quick. "I don't know. I've seen a few girls brought in. No one ever leaves." Her voice wavered, and he could see a tear on her cheek. "I'll look for a way to get you out of here, but I need to know if you've heard the name Persephone in here. I need to know if she's here." He moved closer to the cage as he said this, trying to see if there was a release of some kind to free her. "I don't know anyone's name. We don't get to talk to each other. Please help me." She was now speaking a little louder and in a more hurried voice. Keith imagined she didn't have much time left if he didn't get her out. "I'm going to look around the barn and see how many of you there are, and try to find a way to free you. Don't give up. You'll be out soon." He didn't know how much of what he was saying was true, but he knew he needed to get her out. He needed to give her what hope he could. Making his way back out of the stall and into the main walkway, he began to check the other stalls. To his horror, each stall had a cage and a girl hidden inside. Many of them were so out of it his light didn't even stir them, and none were able to speak. He counted 8 girls before hearing the sound of footsteps outside the barn. Dousing his flashlight, he quickly made his way toward the exit. He wasn't even halfway to the door when he heard the hinges on the main door squeak as it was pulled open. With limited options, he dove under the wagon he had seen earlier. Alex came through the barn door, holding a flashlight and looking around. He had probably seen Heath's light at some point and was coming to investigate. Checking the stalls, Alex made his way through the barn, inching closer and closer to Heath. At each stall, he would shine his light in it, whispering something to the girl inside, and move on to the next one. Heath held his breath as Alex walked up to the wagon, sure that any moment he would be found and that would be it. But there were so many things he wished that he would have said to Samantha and James, but at least they knew where he was. Imagining James rolling onto the farm with the FBI or National Guard and saving the trapped girls gave Heath a small amount of pleasure, knowing his death would not be in vain. As he braced for the inevitable, a noise from outside the barn broke the silence and caught Alex's attention. Turning, Alex moved to the door, nearly at a sprint, and disappeared into the night. This was the one chance Heath would have to escape, and he had to move fast. As he slid out from under the wagon, something caught his shirt and wouldn't let go. Not wanting to risk turning the light on, Heath reached down to feel for the snag and hopefully free himself. Locating the source, he pulled on it and was able to break free. Getting out of the tight space, he glanced back briefly to try and see what had got him and saw what looked like a handle for a small door. Putting the thought of a possible secret room out of his mind, he crept back to the door and quietly exited the barn. As he looked around in the moonlit field, he didn't see Alex anywhere. Taking the chance, he started heading out to some nearby brush, half running and half crouching. Before he could climb in the bushes, someone grabbed him from behind and cupped a hand over his mouth. "Shh," someone whispered in his ear as they moved in unison to the cover of another bush. Heath did as instructed and kept quiet, trying to assess the situation and figure out who had got the drop on him. It couldn't be Alex, he would have shot or stabbed him. No one else was there with him, and only a couple of people knew he was there at all. There was only one person he could think of. "James, what the hell are you doing here?" Heath whispered as they entered the bush and was able to turn and face his friend. "Quiet, I'll explain when we get out of here. Alex is wandering around somewhere and I would rather not be buried in this field tonight." The two men surveyed the surroundings, looking for any sign of the maniac that was now hunting them. After a few moments, with no sign of Alex, Heath and James started making their way slowly through the brush and away from the barn. It took almost 45 minutes for them to get to the edge of the forest that marked safety, and Heath thought he saw Alex more than once standing in the open field looking for them. Reaching the trees, they were able to move a little quicker, and before long they had reached the parking area. Heath noticed the car that had been there when he arrived was still parked, and he was finally able to determine who the car belonged to. "You followed me out? Why didn't you just ask to come?" Heath was trying to hide what he was feeling, but the question came off a little more aggressive than he meant. "You wouldn't have wanted me to come along. Besides, I got here first and saved your skin again." James smiled as he pointed out the fact that Heath would rather have not heard. "I had things under control, though I think we're going to need more than just the two of us on this one." Heath relayed what he had seen in the barn. James' face grew red when he heard about the cages. The men climbed in their cars and headed back to town, arriving at the office just as the sky was beginning to lighten with the coming dawn. A relieved Samantha greeted them with coffee, and they recounted the events of the night once more as she wanted to know every detail. As he finished up his coffee, Heath called a friend he had at the local FBI office and filled him in on what they had found. Following the call, he spent some time recording the details in his journal before heading home to get some much-needed rest. Persephone was still missing from what he knew, and he couldn't get the thought of that possible trap door out of his mind. Was it really a door? What secret was it hiding? So that's the end of chapter 9. The story's really starting to get good now, and this is the part where it really ramps up, and there's a lot of really great stuff that's getting ready to come up, and a lot of the meat of the story. You know, we're getting right into the middle of it. A lot of different things going on. But if you want to hear chapter 10 right now, you can go over to Patreon. It's going to be up on over there a week before. I'm doing these videos weekly, right? So Patreon gets them a week before, and then everybody else gets to see them a week later. There's going to be more coming. We're going to have Legends and Tales. I'm going to kind of diversify. We'll have a couple different videos a week and that kind of thing. So if you are new here, if you made it all the way through chapter 9 and you haven't heard any of the other chapters, go back and watch the other chapters. The story itself is great, but it's better if you listen from the beginning and you get all of the parts of it together, right? So next week is going to be chapter 10. Like I said, that's on Patreon. If it's not available yet on YouTube, it will be over there, so you can go check it out there. Otherwise, that's all I got for now. I want to thank you all for watching. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.